Frank Hyder is a well-known, renowned visual artist. When he started to become an artist, he thought the journey would be a straightforward progression. Over the years, he has discovered that the road has many twists and turns, numerous hills and valleys, and countless challenges. Through this series of short stories, tales, and remembrances, his hope is that these will offer some valuable insight into the life of an artist and what's involved in becoming an artist. In the end, he has come to realize that he is not a painter or sculptor or anything in particular. He is more simply a creative person with great passion and love for the process of making art concerning people and the world around us, who shares his artworks with the public. Join us now as we listen to another episode of A Life in Art series.
Childhood memories are curious things. Frequently, we remember things in curious ways. They're not exactly the way others who were there might remember them. And I'm not really sure, but I know that you could ask 4 or 5 people to talk about an incident or an experience, and they might focus on something different. In my memory, I have a few very significant things that I remember from childhood that really kind of help give me a sense of who I am then in terms of who I am now. And the early memory that I have as a 5-year-old little child, where I grew up in a little town called Audubon, there was a playground attached to the grade school that I was only a kindergarten student in, but it had a large play area in the back with heavy-duty swing sets and sliding boards and jungle gyms and kickball courts and what have you. And they had a summer program that would run after the winter session of school would end. There would be a period of time every day where the playground was open, and they would hire a couple of kids to be supervisors. And the whole thing was administered by a guy from the high school, from the sports arena in the high school. You know, one of the most important things in a small town is often the sporting community. They really take great pride in having football teams and baseball teams, etc. Well, in this particular playground, every week they would have an evening playground session that would go from 6 in the evening, which would be after dinner, until about 8 o'clock. And that would, every week, one of these nights, there would be some kind of event or competition, whether it was a hopscotch competition or a kickball competition or something to give it a more of an official sports feeling. Well, on this particular day, my brothers announced to me that they were having the annual boxing competition at the playground, and they had expected me to go into the 5-year-old grouping and compete. Now, I didn't really even know what boxing was, and I just knew that my older brothers expected me to do something, and that usually meant that if I didn't do it, I would have a pretty hard time around the house. So I didn't think much of it, and then as I went out the door on my way to the morning playground, my mother said to me, she says, and by the way, tonight I know they have boxing and I don't want you involved. Do you have it? And I looked at her and nodded and went out the door and went down to the playground to play away. So I had most of the day to consider, what am I going to do here? Now, I've been told explicitly by my mother I'm not to do this. I'm 5 years old. I've been told by my brothers they're expecting me to do this. So I'm going to just let circumstances unfold. So I signed up in the morning to be in the 5-year-old group, knowing full well if I didn't show up, there was going to be no penalty. So anyway, when the evening time for the event came about, I looked around and my mother was nowhere to be seen, and I basically knew she was never going to come to the playground because my parents didn't do those sort of things. But my brothers were there, so I knew that I had to do the boxing competition. So anyway, they had made a ring in an area of the playground. The ground was covered with cinders that had been spread on the ground from the coal furnaces that they used to have the cinders and to sprinkle them on the ground. So it was a pretty rough piece of ground. If you fell down, you were pretty much guaranteed you were going to skin your knee if you happened to be wearing shorts. Well, anyway, they announced the first bout in 5-year-olds, and I was in that bout with another kid from the neighborhood whose name was Greg. And then they put these boxing gloves on us, and they were full-size boxing gloves. It was ridiculous. They were almost as big as we were, and lifting them up was an effort. Well, anyway, I can still remember the boxing gloves, the cinders on the ground, and the big ring and all the people standing around the ring, and then old jolly Mr. Lair, who ran the program, announcing it was time to start. And we moved into the center of the ring, and the gloves started moving. And first a punch to the shoulder or to the side, and then to the belly. And then as we move further and further, we get a little bit more frustrated, and you start hitting towards the head and towards the face. And eventually, one round, then a second round, and then the third round. And in the third round, I hit Greg hard enough that he fell backwards and went right outside of the ring into the crowd. And with that, I was declared the winner, and everybody cheered, and I said, well, I'm over with that. That's all well and good. And I went to the side, and then there was another 5-year-old bout, and then I had to watch the 8-year-olds, and then there was another bout with the 10-year-olds, and that was pretty much as far as it went. But then we had to have the championships. So a winner of another 5-year-old bout, who was a pretty athletic kid from the neighborhood by the name of Jimmy, and I were matched up. And so we went back into the ring. We had to have the gloves put on again. Same scenario as before. Great big, bulky, heavy gloves and tiny little kids, and cinders all around. And by now the crowd was much more enthusiastic. They were really into it. There was a lot of hollering and hooting. And I could see that Jimmy's father, who was one of the local plumbers in town, was in the corner, and he was hollering quite a lot of things at his son, making it very clear that he expected his son to win, and if he didn't win, he was going to be in trouble. So anyway, we moved into the center of the boxing ring, and at that moment, we began to exchange blows, and we were both now a little bit more experienced than we had been earlier, and we knew that most of the punches you wanted to make, you wanted them to land squarely on the face or on the side of the head, because that was the most effective place. So anyway, we punched away and moved around the ring, kicking the dust from the cinders on the ground as we went, the crowd hollering, and I still remember Jimmy's father hollering louder and louder. He wanted me to, he says, kill him, go ahead, kill him. And I thought that was a little on the extreme side. But anyway, as we went through 2 rounds, and in the third round, we were circling and punching, and there was clearly not a decisive punch from either one of us. And then finally, they called the end. They blew the whistle for the end of the bout, and Mr. Lair took into the center and walked over and grabbed me by the arm and held my arm up and declared me the winner. With that, I saw Jimmy's father look at him and holler at him, and as Jimmy went over to the corner to get his gloves off, his father grabbed him by the hair and pulled him through the ring and marched him out of the playground hollering at him. My brothers were looking at me with a great sense of accomplishment, and I can tell you, for quite a long time, most of the little kids in the neighborhood cut me a little bit of extra space because they saw me as a boxing threat of some kind or another. Anyway, I got home. no physical damage was notable. My mother didn't say anything. I figured I was in the clear. Well, a couple of days later, the local newspaper, the Weekly Visitor, printed the news of the town, and on page 2, the news of the playground events was published. And the very first name you saw was the winner of the 5-year-old boxing bout, and it was my name. Now, I couldn't even read, so it had to be shown to me later. But anyway, with that, I walk into the house and on a completely not expecting any difficulty, to be greeted by my mother who was wielding a fly swatter. And as she swings the fly swatter and strikes me across the shoulder, and as I look at her and she starts telling me, I told you not to get into that boxing. You disobeyed me. And now she's chasing me around the house from room to room, swinging and letting me have it with her fly swatter, and if she missed with the fly swatter, catching me with the side of her hand. And finally, I managed to get myself into a closet in my brother's bedroom and hold the door closed so she couldn't get at me, and she calmed down a little bit and disappeared. Well, I didn't really remember that story all that well over the years, because it was not something I really wanted to remember all that well. But anyway, about 30 years later, I was in my house in Philadelphia, and we had a roof deck that you could step out of our kitchen onto this roof deck. And I stepped out of the kitchen onto the roof deck, and my little son, who was about 8 years old at the time, says to me, Dad, he said, I really didn't realize you were a winner. And I said, a winner? What are you talking about? He said, no, you're a winner. And I said, what do you mean? So he hands me this piece of paper. Here is this yellowed piece of newspaper clipping wrapped inside of Scotch tape that my mother had saved from the Weekly Visitor from back in 1956, that simply said, winner of the 5-year-old boxing competition, with my name right there. And I looked at this piece of paper, and then I looked over at my mother sitting there, and I looked at my son, who was as proud as punch to have a father that was a winner. And I thought to myself, it's really funny how these things turn out. And in retrospect, my memory of that event was basically the politics of negotiating between my brothers and my mother and the neighborhood kids and surviving the whole event. And years later, somehow or another, my son saw this as a significant moment in both of our lives. So the perspective that one uses when looking at a memory is often awfully, awfully important.
Thank you for listening. If you have questions or suggestions for future episodes, please reach out to Frank Hyder on Facebook or Instagram. We hope to see you at one of the next A Life in Art episodes.